Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to a special edition of Movie Goodness here on the KB Radio Network. And this is the review of 20th Century Studios' new horror film, The Boogeyman, which drops in theaters on June the 2nd. How are we doing, everybody? Yes, The Boogeyman. This is a supernatural horror film from Rob Savage, who I haven't seen any of his work. I've he's directed a couple of films, at least from my research on his filmography. He did a few films, but I have not seen any of them. And this is my first exposure to him. The film is written by Scott Beck and not Brandon, but Brian Woods, along with Mark Hamill. And Beck and Woods, they wrote A Quiet Place and A Quiet Place 2. And they also directed a film, co-directed a film, I guess you could say, from earlier this year with Adam Driver called 61, I think the name of it was. But it was an interesting film. But A Quiet Place I love. That is a interesting take on horror films. And so those two names, when I found out that they wrote this and this film was produced, well, one of the producers on this film was Sean Levy, who has a just a filmography out this world, but most notably, he is one of the creators of Stranger Things on Netflix. And so you put all this in a big old pot of gumbo, and you should have a decent horror film. This film is based on a 1973 short story of the same name by none other than the horror master himself, Stephen King. And so you put that in the gumbo pot as well, and you should have a decent horror film. And then you put a little side dressing on the side there with a top-notch cast such as Chris Messina, um, Sophie Thatcher, Vivian Blair. Uh, Once again, should be a nice meal, a nice horror meal, if you will. This was a really good film. I am so impressed by this movie. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I wasn't too excited about going to see this. For some reason, I didn't feel like going to see one of these little fly by night horror films that they just throw out in theaters for whatever reason, And I was a little hesitant to go see it. So my expectations were really, really low. And I think that helped why I enjoyed this film so much. The premise of The Boogeyman goes as this: high school student Sadie Harper and her little sister Sawyer are still reeling from the recent death of their mother. Devastated by their own pain, their father, Will, a therapist by profession, gives them neither the support nor the affection that they try to claim from him. When a desperate patient shows up unexpectedly at their house asking for help, they bring in a terrifying entity that preys on the family and feeds on their greatest suffering. And that is the movie. That is the movie. It's pretty cut and dry. There's no complicated plot, you know. There's no trying to dig up for answers that are impossible answers to find, but the main characters seem to find them. You know those type of movies. It wasn't that. There was a little detective work done by the lead character here, Sadie, played by Sophie Thatcher, but that was a believable turn there, Very, very good horror film. I must say, it takes a lot for me to jump in a movie, in a horror film, because I'm so used to the jump scares and, the little false jump scares, to put it more plainly. it doesn't do anything for me. But I can honestly say this did. This did, and it was earned. These were some really good jump scares, and they were real. They weren't false. They were actual jump scares. Let's start off with the cast. Sophie Thatcher, who carried this film. Sophie Thatcher, you may know from the show on Showtime, Yellow Jackets, and I enjoy her on Yellow Jackets. I really enjoy her on that show, and she plays the oldest daughter here, and she held it down, man. She really carried this film. It was all on her, and she did an excellent job of carrying this film. Her father is played by Chris Messina, and he is an accomplished actor. I've seen him in films like Devil. Just recently saw him in Air, and countless other films that he has popped up in. Enjoyed his work here as well as the father. And the most impressive out of them all is the youngest daughter, uh, Sawyer. I think her name, yeah, Sawyer, and she is played by Vivian Blair, a young actress. I don't know. She can't be no more than 9, 10 years old. I don't know. I didn't look it up, but she she did an awesome job. She had to go through a lot in this film, dealing with this entity, and really impressed. I enjoyed all the acting, all the supporting actors. The only actors in this film I did not care for, or the characters I did not care for, were the friends of Sadie. Her friends were just annoying, you know. Now this young lady lost her mother about a month ago, and they're cracking jokes about it. One of the friends just cracking jokes about it. It's nothing to crack. What are you? What? You know, it was just dumb. And the rest of the friends, so-called friends, I guess you could say acquaintances, uh, didn't do anything. You know, they were like, "Oh no, Becky or whatever her name was, like, don't do that." And it was just dumb. Actually, to be honest with you, those characters were not needed in this film at all. There was no purpose for them at all. That's my biggest drawback. Was those characters? I think it was four girls. It was no need for them. You know, it was like they just had to throw in a Mean Girl reference. You know what I'm saying? It was completely unnecessary. But overall, I think the acting was great by our main actors in this film. Um, the direction, Rob Savage, as I said before, this is my first exposure to him. I think this is his first big budget film, or studio film, should I say. Who This was beautifully directed. Beautifully directed. It had a perfect tone, a perfect pace. I feel that all of the camera work was perfect. You know, the lighting, because this entity exists in the darkness, in the shadows. So it had to be perfectly lit. You know, the house that they were in, it was just perfectly done. Um, the tone was perfectly done. The scares, as I mentioned before, you know, perfect setups. It was at perfect beats. You know, it wasn't just formulaic, like 1, 2, 3 scare, 1, 2, 3 scare. No, it was all paced, even plays in that in one scene. Um, when it's like, okay, I'm gonna count to three and I'm gonna do this. I'm not gonna go into spoilers of what happened there because I want everybody to experience it, but it goes off beat, so you can get that effect of the jumps. In the theater I was in, everybody was like, what? When it happened, it was perfectly set up, and it happened multiple times throughout this film. Um, the entity, the boogeyman itself, absolutely loved how they used the boogeyman throughout this film. It wasn't, when you go to certain movies where there's a horror film or a science fiction film and you never see the creature a lot, and it gets kind of annoying. For example, and by no means am I comparing the boogeyman to Jaws, but you can make some comparisons to it in the sense of in Jaws, you don't see the shark a lot. And if you know all the behind the scenes and the story behind the making of Jaws, you know that Steven Spielberg initially wanted to show the shark throughout the whole film. It wasn't supposed to be uh you know hidden throughout the film. But the reason it was because they couldn't get the mechanical shark to work, so they had to think of a innovative way to incorporate the shark throughout that film, and it added to the dread, and that's why that film is considered one of the greatest horror films of all time. Uh, Talking about Jaws here, the Boogeyman does a similar thing, and it was done on purpose. You don't see the entity a lot. It's there, but it's in the shadows. You see the eyes glowing. You hear the noise. You hear it talking. You know, this film lets your imagination do the work. you know, it makes it do the work. You don't see this thing, and you don't get a full reveal of this thing until later on in the film. And so it's it just makes your mind go crazy throughout this movie. Like, what is this thing? What is this? Where is it at? What am I supposed to be looking for? It is that type of film. I actually enjoyed this immensely. I am so happy to report that this was an excellent film. I'm I'm shocked. I'm shocked. Um, it even added a little flavor to it. I didn't know this film was filmed here in New Orleans. So that adds even more. I was looking at Eric. I was like, wait, that's in New Orleans. they shot that here. So it added a little more through it. I'm a little biased. I'm not going to lie, but it, it could have been shot in Timbuktu. This movie was great. Especially if you're a horror fan, I highly recommend this film. Trust me, if it wasn't for me getting the opportunity to go see it early, I probably would have let this wait till it got to screaming, and I probably wouldn't have ran to the theater to go see it. But I'm so happy that I got to see it in the theater because the sound, um, the the way it looked, everything was a theatrical feel, and it just added to the element of horror. The Boogeyman gets a letter grade of a B plus. This is one of the best horror films I've seen in a long time. It up up till now, I would say that last year's Barbarian was the one of my favorite horror films to come out in recent time. I know it's early, I only seen this once, but I would say it's on par with Barbarian, if not slightly better. To be honest with you, I really enjoyed this movie. A pleasant surprise. And kudos to the people over at Disney. Because this film was released by Disney. Initially, this was going to be released on Hulu, directly to Hulu, but they put it in a test screening. The test screening went bananas. It was completely positive. They put it in another test screening just to see if it was a fluke or something, and that test screening was positive. So they said, you know what, we're going to put it in theaters, and I think that's a good choice, even though they're putting it in theaters the same weekend as Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. May hurt it a little bit box office wise, but I think it was a good choice to put it in theaters because it's a theatrical film. It really is. Check it out if you're a fan of horror. If you're a fan of good movies. Another point I wanted to touch in on, I'm so excited. I just went clean over it. The element of grief in this film just deals with grief. And that's the whole point of this movie. And it's a cool way that they use that. It's kind of therapeutic, should I say. It really was. It was I'm not currently grieving, but I can feel the story they were telling throughout this film. Oh, it was great. It was well put together. This is not your typical horror film that, with all due respect, Blumhouse puts out. You know what I'm saying? This was a well constructed horror film. Job well done from all the filmmakers in front and behind the camera. I think they did an excellent job. I would like to know: are you planning on checking out the Boogeyman, or is this not your bag, or are you just gonna go see Spider-Man this weekend? Hey, look, it's all good. Film is subjective. It's not for everybody. Every movie is not for everyone. But I'd like to know how you feel about it. Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also look me up on Twitter at KB Radio Network, and on all social media platforms. Just look up the KB Radio Network. That includes YouTube. Don't forget to go on YouTube, look for the KB Radio Network, subscribe to the channel, and like this video if you will. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you are currently listening to movie goodness here on the KB Radio Network, don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show with all of your loved ones. Everyone, thank you for joining me with this review of the Boogeyman. I can't wait to speak to you again. I want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love one another. And until we speak again, you all be blessed.